everybody, welcome to my homestead and welcome to my channel. My name is Jared. This is a video of an X-class flare that just happened on the sun. And guess when it happened? I had just done this video called The Stars Are Angry, where I went through a whole list of things that have been going on with the sun, as well as other stars. And I got a comment. It was from Christian Fire Poppy. Some of you know who that is. If you don't, this is her channel. I've interviewed her before. If you like my content, I'm sure that you'll like hers as well. I'll leave a link for her channel in the description below. But this is what she said. An X2.8 flare occurred today at 1702 UTC from AR 3514, which produced R3 strong radio blackouts on portions of the sunlit side of the Earth. This is the largest solar flare of this solar cycle, and since September 10th, 2017. Now, let me tell you, that is mighty interesting. I went in depth on this because I was like, well, is this yet another bookend to President Nelson's presidency? Well, I'll show you. All right, continuing. When the large Mexico earthquake struck, many people connect earthquakes to these flares. And the Geminid meteor shower is still happening through December 17th. Supposed to be the best show of the year. Thanks, Jared. So thank you, Jen from Christian Fire Poppy. I'm so glad that you brought this up. And it's so interesting that this happened on the day that I made this video. I'm going to do just like a very quick recap toward the end of this video of everything that we covered having to do with our sun in this video. But if you want to see the full thing, including other stars, then go watch that video. The Stars Are Angry is the name of the video. Okay, so let's look at this article. This is on Yahoo News, but it's from Miami Herald. Amazing sun flare was one of the largest solar radio events ever recorded, NASA says. Now, don't get that confused. It's not saying that it's one of the largest solar flares ever recorded. It's one of the largest radio events, solar radio events. So don't worry, we'll get into it. Okay, let's read what I have highlighted here. The sun spewed a massive solar flare and disrupted radio traffic from the mid-Atlantic states to northern Antarctica, according to maps released by Space Weather Prediction Center. The quote-unquote amazing event on Thursday, December 14th, has been deemed, quote, one of the largest solar radio events ever recorded, the center said in a news release. NASA reports the flare emerged from the far northwest corner of the sun and peaked around 12:02 p.m. Eastern Time. Impact was largely felt on the side of the Earth that was facing the sun. At the time, officials said, quote, radio communication interference with aircraft were reported by multiple National Weather Center Weather Service Units, CWSU, co-located at FAA facilities, NASA reported. These impacts were felt from one end of the nation to the other. Additionally, SWPC is analyzing a possible Earth-directed coronal mass ejection. So, in case you don't know, these are two different things, solar flares and coronal mass ejections. More on that later. Scientists rate solar flares based on energy output, with X-class being the most intense. The December 14th flare measured as an X2.8, but is far from the strongest recorded by scientists. The largest in the past decade was an X8.2, recorded on September 10th, 2017, NASA says. Okay, so that's when the next largest one was in 2017. It's really interesting if you'll notice, and I meant to highlight this, that these two seem to point to each other. You have a thing going on where it's 2.8. Well, first, let's do it in chronological order. First, there's a 8.2, and then there's a 2.8. You're going to, well, maybe you're not, but I think some of you are going to be stunned when I show you my new spreadsheet for X-class flares. So this is similar to the whole thing with the angel Moroni dropping his trumpet on 3/18 or March 18th of 2020. And then a mirror event and a mirror date happened in 2022, where it was on 8/13. There was a large, loud explosion over the Salt Lake area, the opposite of an angel going quiet. So I think there's something to these things. And here's another one. 2.8, 8.2, or sorry, I did it reverse again. 8.2 and 2.8. Okay, let's move on. Okay, this is on NASA's NASA's website. The X8.2 flare of September 2017 as seen by SDO. I'm not going to play the video of that, but I'll leave the link for this in the description below. Between September 9th to 10th of 2017, the sun launched a series of 3 coronal mass ejections, CMEs, culminating with an X8.2 flare from the eastern limb as the active region was rotating away from the Earth. So in 2017, and by the way, I checked the Hebrew calendar. This did not land during any of the fall feast days. It was I think like a week or two before Rosh Hashanah or the Feast of Trumpets. But what interested me was that there were actually 3. 3 is an important number in the gospel. 3, 7, and so yeah, these 3 flares that went off. CNN gives a little bit more detail about that. Okay, several X and M class flares have occurred over the last week, with an X9.3 flare occurring on September 10th, a second severe flare of class X8.2 was seen on September 10th. In comparison, the strongest flare to have its strength measured was a category X2.8, which occurred back in 2003. So that's the strongest ever flare, 2003. But in 2017, according to NASA, there were 3 big flares, and 2 of them were X-class flares. And the largest was the X9.3. Okay? So that's how it happened. So I wanted to, like usual, I want to see the big picture. I don't want to just read these stories and be like, oh, that's amazing, but not have the full context, because this isn't something that I really follow too closely. Solar flares and CMEs. I do think that they can be significant. In this case, I think that it is, with this interesting pattern, correlation, parallel, whatever. But I wanted to see the full picture. I wanted to know, how often do X-class flares occur? How many of them impact Earth? So I researched it, and this is what I found. Okay, so we got to go to this. Actually, before I forget, here's the update on the Flood the Earth Challenge. We're at 7,430 copies of the Book of Mormon that have been shared. So we're closing in on 7,500. And we're really close to 800 people that have joined the challenge. So if you haven't already, please consider doing so. Just share a Book of Mormon, whether it's a digital copy with the Book of Mormon app or a physical copy, and then let me know in the comments or send me an email. And make sure to include #flood. Okay, so I put together this new spreadsheet. The name of this spreadsheet is Signs Solar Flares. And I got this information from 2 different sources. First, I got it from spaceweatherlive.com, where they have top 50 solar flares. Okay. And they list them all out, but they're not in chronological order. They're according to strength. So here's that one that the article was talking about in X2.8 back in 2003, and then on down the line. So I looked at that. So let's talk about that first. So this is what we have. I'm going to zoom in. I put it in chronological order. And as you can see, I put who the president of the church was at that time, because that's going to be significant in just a minute, I think, the way I interpret it. And so what you have, this goes back to 1997. And I inserted wherever there was a year that didn't have an X-class flare. Okay, that way it's easier to visualize. It's usually every single year there's an X-class flare, and that seems to be the case. So, starting in 1997, you go down, and then in 1999 there is no X-class flare. Interestingly, there were a bunch of them the year before. In 1998, there were 6 of them. But then 1999, there were none. Okay? And then you go on through time, and every single year there's X-class flares. Remember, this is from starting, I guess, in the year 2000. From the year 2000 until 2007, you have X-class flares every single year. And during that period of time, you have the X2.8, November 4th of 2003, the largest one ever recorded. There were also a couple other sizable flares. In fact, just a month before, in October, just a few days before, there was a 17.2. And then September of 2005, there was a 17. Okay. All right. But anyway, then all of a sudden you have a period of time, you have 4 years where there were no X-class flares that were recorded or observed. And this was during the transition time between President Hinckley and President Thomas S. Monson. So President Hinckley's last year, the majority of his last year, there were no X-class flares. In the first 3 years of President Monson's presidency, there were no X-class flares. Okay, and then it started back up in 2011, and you see it every year. And then there's 1 year that misses, 2016. And then you have 2 in 2017. And then during President Nelson's time, starting in 2018, there are no X-class flares in any year of his presidency except for this year, 2023. So, and this is a pretty big gap right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years of no X-class flares. That is, in fact, the largest gap that I have according to this data. I don't know what things are like before 1997, so maybe occasionally you do have large gaps. I have no idea. But at least from 1997 until now, this is the largest gap, and it coincides with his presidency, starting with his first year. And then the other big gap is during this transition period between Gordon B. Hinckley and Thomas S. Monson. It's odd. You know, some people will, wave it off and just say, oh, that's nothing. You're just looking too much into it. Well, fine. I don't know why you're watching this channel, because this is pretty much all that we do. Okay, this is what I do. And I do, and other people think that this could be significant. I think the important thing is to say maybe, possibly, rather than be rigid and a know-it-all and be like, no, this doesn't mean anything, or yes, this does mean. Just be flexible. Just say, I don't know, maybe. Okay, so this is very odd, especially in light of how we've been talking for the last little while now about how it seems like the 3 most important years during President Nelson's presidency have been 2018. There were a lot of things that happened in that year, both in the church and then outside the church. And it was his first year. And then 2020 and then 2023. Those 3 years are the ones that stick out based on world events and things happening in the church. Most recently, that was highlighted by the fact that we were looking at the Christmas devotionals. And here we have this interesting thing where there's like this pairing of Joy to the World, which is a second coming hymn, even though it's sung at Christmas, and the Hallelujah chorus from Handel's Messiah, which corresponds to Revelation chapter 19, which is about the marriage feast being ready. Okay. I think that this was intentional, how these were coupled together, because they're both second coming hymns. And this breaks tradition. You can see that the closing hymn has always been Silent Night, except for 2 years. 2018, President Nelson's first year, and 2023. Additionally, in 2020, it was basically the same as 2023 and 2018. They all started with Joy to the World, but in 2020, the Hallelujah chorus was the second to last. It was not the last hymn. But you can see how these 3 years stand out in that way. And I don't think it's arbitrary. I don't think it's random. I think that it's intentional. Okay, so anyway, enough about that. Let's take a look at Bookends. No, wait. Before we look at Bookends, another thing that I looked at was this Wikipedia article. It's called List of Solar Storms, and it has 2 tables. One is events affecting Earth. Okay, and then here you go right here. And then the second one is events not affecting Earth. So I went through here, went through all the information, and I updated my spreadsheet to reflect that. So I added column E called affected Earth. And if there's an orange yes, a cell that's orange with yes inside of it, then that flare affected Earth. So the most recent one that happened yesterday, yes, it affected Earth. And then the last one, the most powerful one, the last one, let's just put it that way. In 2017, that one also affected Earth. Okay. But you go through time, keep going back in time, and you see that the majority of them don't affect Earth. The one January 20th of 2005 did. The largest one, which was an X2.8, did on November 4th, 2003. And looks like we have 2 more. One in the year 2000 and one in 2001. So typically, these X-class flares do not affect Earth. But so it's more on the rare side when it does. So what you'll notice is that the 2 years recently that it did affect Earth were these 2 right in a row. One on either side of his presidency. Well, let me say, one just months before his presidency began, and then one this year, which to me, and I think a lot of you, it feels like it's getting toward the end, whether he passes away or whether it's the second coming. I don't know. Maybe he'll live for 10 more years. Who knows? But as of right now, there's just this interesting thing to consider, right? And so this looks like a bookend to me. And what I mean by that is on this spreadsheet, we've noticed a bunch of other things where somewhere toward like the beginning of his presidency and then somewhere toward right now, this year, you have corresponding events that take place. So for example, you have the 2 eclipses, the one in 2017 that goes over Jackson County and Adam-on-Diamond in far west. And then you have the one that's coming up on April 8th of 2024. And that one's going to go over Palmyra and the Sacred Grove, Kirtland, the Kirtland Temple, and it's also the day after conference. So you have these 2 things on either side of this time frame, which is really interesting. But it's not only that. There's this recent thing that he did where in the last general conference, he made reference to his very first address to the church on 2 days after he became president of the church on the 16th of January. He told the church that he wanted everybody to begin with the end in mind, and the end being the temple, right? And then he reminded us about that in this last general conference in his talk called Think Celestial. Okay. We're going to skip this one. This one isn't so much a bookend, but you have this thing that we were talking about earlier about the angel Moroni in 2020, and then the meteor with the loud boom in 2022 on mirror dates 318 and 813. Okay, we just talked about that. You have these blue moons. There have been 3 so far in his presidency. Now, blue moons do occur. on a regular a semi-regular basis. It's not like they're very rare. But what is more rare is when you have a super blue moon, and especially when you have a super blue blood moon, which means that it's also a lunar eclipse. And that's what happened 17 days after he became president of the church. So you had this this pretty rare occurrence 17 days after he becomes president of the church. And then this year, 9 days before his 99th birthday, on 9/9, which is his birthday, September 9th, there was a super blue moon. So that kind of corresponds with that first one in January of 2018. And then in the middle, and in the year 2020, on Halloween, you had just a regular blue moon. So it's another set of 3, as well as bookends. There's foxes that have been seen at the Temple Mount, which is rare. And this has great significance to the Jews, because when they read the Old Testament and they look at certain prophecies, they viewed this as something that has to happen before the temple is built. So, and as far as I know, I haven't found any other articles from any other years. You have the first sighting, which was in 2019. Okay. And it happened during the 9-day period before Tisha B'Av, which is the saddest day on the Hebrew calendar, where they fast and think about the destruction of the first and second temples, because they believe, the tradition has it that it happened on Tisha B'Av when they were destroyed, as well as other events in Jewish history, like the Spanish Inquisition and stuff like that. So you had that. And then the one that most recently happened was actually on Tisha B'Av. And then you have one in the middle, which was earlier this year, where you saw foxes at the Temple Mount. So you have another set of 3 with these 2 that are kind of like having this like sandwich effect. These 2, the earliest one and the most recent one, having to do with Tisha B'Av, or the 9th of Av. Av is one of the months on the Hebrew calendar. Okay. And this is during President Nelson's presidency. This one, not so much a bookend, but you had 3 sets of 3 asteroids that happened on these dates. One was a week before Rosh Hashanah, and then the next one was on Christmas Day, which in that year, 2022, was also on the 8th day of Hanukkah, so the last day of lighting the menorah. Okay. And they were giant asteroids. They were large. And then you had another set of 3 asteroids that came by this year on the 25th of September on Yom Kippur, the holiest day on the Hebrew calendar. And now we have the newest edition where you have these 2 solar flares. There have been these 2 X-class solar flares. There haven't been any other X-class solar flares between these dates. And interestingly, like I said, first you have an 8.2, and then you have a 2.8. So, I mean, there you go. Just more really interesting things that are happening. More bookends. More reason I think there is to believe that we're getting close to the end. I think that, but I'm not going to be too disappointed if that's not the case. But I don't know. It's a lot of stuff piling up. Okay. So we got that. Okay. And then I wanted to just remind you of other things that have been going on with the sun. This is from last year. I just saw this story today, though. This is on Business Insider. The solar wind, which the sun is constantly blasting over the planets, suddenly disappeared and created a void around Mars. So that happened last year. I know it may not be that notable, but it's notable enough for them to write an article about it. So I'm just taking note of that. Also, the reason why I made that video called "The Stars Are Angry" is because of this article that was sent to me by Cubria. Gigantic hole in the sun wider than 60 Earths is spewing super fast solar wind right at us. In that video, we noted the fact that these big holes that happen, they're not like really that rare. They do happen, and there's a bunch of times, that I showed in that video where they've happened all these different years. But what is unusual about this time, this one that happened, is the time at which it's happening, which at this point of the solar cycle, they don't expect this kind of hole to open up. And more than that, if there is one, it's typically in the polar regions of the sun, but this one was at the equator. So they're calling it a mystery, and it's unusual. Okay. We also noted, and this article is from November 2nd of this year, watch a massive canyon of fire explode from the sun. And here it is, this thing right here. I believe that's called a filament. Let me know in the comments below if you know. But you had this notable thing that happened. Next article, this is from February of this year. Strange, unprecedented vortex spotted around the sun's north pole. And here it is. There's a vortex starting right now. There it goes. And it's on the North Pole. Okay, next. This is September of last year. The sun just produced an explosion so big, it will be studied for years. Now, do not confuse this with a solar flare. This is a CME. And here's an explanation about that. Okay, this article is from Earth and Sky. Is a solar flare the same as a CME, or a coronal mass ejection? Sometimes solar flares and CMEs happen at the same time. The strongest flares are almost always correlated with CMEs. Both are born when the sun's magnetic fields explosively realign, driving energy into space. But a solar flare is a brilliant flash of light. A CME is an immense cloud of magnetized particles hurled into space in a particular direction, sometimes toward Earth. Okay, so what they saw last year, September 7th, 2022 is the date of this article, was a CME. A CME so big, it will be studied for years. It says, I can safely say the September 5th event is one of the largest, if not the largest, solar energetic particle storms that we have seen so far since Solar Orbiter launched in 2020. All right. Next. There was this. Watch monstrous solar tornado the size of 14 stacked Earths swirls at the sun's north pole. And you can see that on this post on X. I will repost it onto my account. If you're on X, feel free to follow me. But there you go. A notable tornado that took place on the sun. Okay, and then CNN, the sun's activity is peaking sooner than expected. Yep, they expect, the forecast right now is that solar maximum, it's an 11-year cycle, and solar maximum they're predicting will begin in early 2024. Which is really interesting because a lot of us are looking forward to this next general conference, and the day after conference is when you have the 2024 eclipse. It's also during conference on the 7th that President Nelson reaches his 40 years of having been an apostle. So anyway, a lot of stuff. And then space.com, this is on July, the article is dated July 3rd of this year. Sun breaks out with record number of sunspots, sparking solar storm concerns. So the sun, the last couple of years, there's been a lot of stuff going on the sun, and human caused climate change cannot be blamed for what's going on with the sun. So I don't know. You take all this together. Here, let's go back to this flare that just happened yesterday. You take this all together. These are a lot of signs and wonders in the heaven, and they all have to do with our sun. This like pause during President Nelson's presidency of like no X-class flares is strange. I think it's strange. Now, I'm just, like I said, I'm just going off of this website, and it just says top 50 solar flares. So maybe there have been other ones, because like it looks like it cuts off at 2.6. So maybe there have been some 2.5 or below X-class solar flares that have taken place between that time or during that time. But I still think that it's very interesting that if you take it from 2.6 and above, that you have this space right here. And in addition, like I said, column E, the ones that actually affected Earth, how those seem to be bookends to President Nelson's time as president of the church. I don't know. Is it the end? I don't know. We're just going to have to keep moving forward and see what actually happens. But it seems to me like 2023 is an important year. Possibly because of the war that started in Israel, would be my guess, unless there's something else. Okay, well, that's going to be it for this one. So if you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe. Like this video if you liked it. Leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. Also, make sure to share it, and I'll talk to you guys later.